Thank you for joining us. We are Finding God in Video Games, and in today's episode, we are continuing our Dreams Interrupted series as we take a look at the upcoming sequel or
it's not really a sequel.
Pre-sequel?
It's kind of a prequel. It's
pre-sequel, right?
It's something like
or whatever you want to call with whatever is happening with the next chapter of the Final Fantasy VII remake saga.
Well, Final Fantasy VII has long been regarded as one of the most important and popular releases in gaming history, and it remains in many gamers' top 10 all-time list, despite the fact that it came out 25 years ago. I mean, you have to think a lot of games have come out in the last 25 years, and somehow this singular RPG has found a way to not only remain iconic and memorable, but is now gaining an entirely new fan base through the Final Fantasy VII Remake project that's currently underway. We've already gotten the first chapter of that, and after the cliffhanger of an ending that we received at the end of that title, we're all left wondering what could possibly be coming next for these heroes and the story that we all thought we were so very familiar with. I mean, I didn't really expect that it would be done in an episodic form. And, the original Final Fantasy VII came out as one game across a few discs. And when it was done, it was done. We got the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it cut off very, very early in the narrative that we at least think we know.
Right.
Well, it turns out Square Enix had an even larger surprise in store for us. The next chapter in the Final Fantasy VII Remake saga will not be a sequel. It is actually a prequel, even though it is the sequel to the remake. I know, that's a little complicated.
Yeah, that's why.
We are returning to Crisis Core, an adventure that many of us have probably missed out on. Now, it did achieve during its run 2 million units in sales, which is no small accomplishment for a title that only launched on the ill-fated Sony PSP handheld system. And that particular system, 20 million people have purchased the original Final Fantasy VII, or the 2020 remake of it. And I'm guessing, more people have probably played it, borrowing it from other people and such.
Of course.
So the vast majority of gamers, if you think, over 20 million people have played Final Fantasy VII. At best, 2 million people have played Crisis Core. That's a lot of people that are going to experience this story for the very first time.
Yeah.
Now, in our last episode, if you didn't get to listen to it, we kind of went through the challenging story about the PSP's journey, or lack thereof, into success, and how Sony tried to achieve success in the portable gaming environment. Scattered along the broken road that Sony took to explore that challenging and competitive environment, many excellent gaming titles became trapped in the crossfire, and one of those was the universally acclaimed Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. Now, this game had it all. It had full high-definition cinematics, which was, obviously not something that was present in the original Final Fantasy VII. It had a completely updated combat system, and most importantly, it featured a brand new story that explored the untold origins of many of our favorite characters, kind of helped us understand how this whole conflict started in the first place. But despite all of its best efforts, Crisis Core was released on a system that was doomed. Mm-hmm. Now, technically, the PSP survived on store shelves for a full 10 years. Didn't really feel like that.
Yeah.
But it survived, but it never managed to dent the impenetrable armor of Nintendo's handheld dominance. Mm-hmm. So the PSP, along with all of its underwhelming successors, PSP Go, PlayStation Vita, all of that good stuff, all of that faded into obscurity, and all the games that were created specifically for that platform went down with the ship. Now, sure, there were a couple of lifeboats that were launched that gave some of these games a new lease on life. PSP exclusives like Patapon, Loco Roco, the God of War Origins titles, just to name a few. But Crisis Core and the epic story of Zack Fair was not even handed a life preserver as the PSP sunk to the bottom of the gaming ocean. And it looked like game over for that entire story, at least until now.
We all know how difficult it is to return to sleep after experiencing like a nightmare. After waking up in a panic and seeking reassurance that, everything's okay, it's hard to trust that we won't return to that hellish dreamscape that we just escaped from. We're still tired, our eyes are heavy, our body is exhausted, and we crave that sweet release of drifting off to sleep.
But, we don't control our dreams, and in that kind of position, we don't feel like we can trust them. The familiar embrace of our pillow now only represents fear, a broken promise of rest replaced by trauma. And for many of us, what I just described isn't just the nightmares we have that we face as when we lay our head down at the end of a very long day. It's the nightmare that we face during our waking hours as we live a life that was once full of comforting promises, but now only offers us pain, sorrow, and regret. So how do we wake up from a nightmare that is present during our waking hours? Where is our refuge when the light of day only reminds us of what we have lost? Even as followers of Christ, our God-given dreams can seemingly turn into horrific nightmares before our eyes for a variety of reasons. And today, we're going to find some answers. Contending with dreams that turn into nightmares is not unique to any of us. To varying degrees, we all face these situations. And few souls can say they have experienced the level of painful and undeserved tragedy that was endured by Ruth, a woman who was simply trying to live her best life when a horrific nightmare intervened for her. In 6 short verses in the book named after her, we are introduced to her story as a woman, and then a bride, and then a childless widow. In 10 years, her dreams turned into nightmarish ashes, with no reason to believe that things were going to get better. She had given the best years of her life in service of a dream that would never come to fruition, and her future prospects looked pretty grim. We'll go ahead and read through that just so that way you have a reference point. So Ruth, very first chapter, first 6 verses. It came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi. The name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Epaphrites of Bethlehem, Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. They took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. Ugh. And it's the book is called Ruth, right? But the story of Ruth is about far more than just her story. It's the story of her long-suffering mother-in-law, Naomi. In many ways, the book of Ruth and the way it intertwines Ruth and Naomi's story reminds me of the twin helix of the narrative of Final Fantasy VII's Cloud Strife and Zack Fair, the protagonist of Crisis Core. This is why I'm kind of running these in parallel here. Think about it. So the book, talking about Ruth here, the book is literally named the Book of Ruth. It's the redemptive story of Ruth as she moves on to marry Boaz, give birth to the lineage of descendants that would one day include King David and Jesus Christ himself. That's fantastic, right?
Right.
But what about Naomi? What about the prequel story that set all of these future promises in motion? In our race to find Ruth's happy ending, it's easy to forget that while Ruth did lose her husband, Naomi lost her husband, her 2 sons, any hope of seeing any grandchildren in her life, and on top of all that, any means of providing for herself and her daughters-in-law. Right. So, Ruth was in a major crisis. Let's not downplay that. But Naomi was truly trapped in an unimaginable nightmare. Let's look at it from her perspective. We'll continue reading the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 6 through 13 here. It says, Then Naomi arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. She had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband," obviously meaning new husbands.
Mm-hmm.
So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept, and they said to her, "Surely we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." And then a few verses later, 19 through 21, this is after Ruth has decided to continue with Naomi. Orpah did not. It says, "Now the 2 of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened, when they came to Bethlehem, the city was excited because of them. And the women said, 'Is this Naomi?' And she said to them, 'Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?'" Naomi saw her situation in very realistic and practical terms. She was too old to have a husband. She really had no hope of having more children, and she was unwilling to drag these innocent women any deeper into her life of tragedy than what had already happened. When she said the words, "The hand of the Lord has gone out against me," well, I don't know about you, but
I felt that.
that's a rough thing to hear.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling many of us have felt the exact same way. Naomi went as far as to embrace her pain by renaming herself Mara, which is literally translated bitter. Her previous name, Naomi, meant pleasant. So she went from pleasant dreams to bitter nightmares, all in the span of just 21 verses. I mean, it would seem like both Ruth and Naomi's story had kind of run their course. But similar to the strange and unexpected way that Crisis Core came from seeming irrelevance, kind of a forgotten has-been of a console that no longer exists, and to now being the next planned remaster in development from Square Enix, Naomi's return from bitterness also was a story that's not over yet. The Lord had neither forsaken nor forgotten her, and Naomi would find a way back into her personal dreams by helping Ruth discover the purpose beyond her pain. Rather than bury herself in her personal tragedy, Naomi decided to help Ruth. She decided to help pursue Ruth's dreams and play matchmaker for her. And because Naomi unselfishly placed her own bitterness aside so she could help someone else see their dreams come true, Naomi finally saw her nightmare end as well. In Crisis Core, going back to the game, this is the origin story of Zack, the character who would hand that iconic giant buster sword, as well as the role of the protagonist of the series, over to Cloud Strife. I mean, that's who we all think of. When you think of Final Fantasy VII, you think of the blonde, spiky-haired dude.
Every time, yeah.
And Cloud receives all of the attention and all of the accolades as the main character of the series, but the reality is his story only exists because of Zack's. And while it took many years for this to finally happen, Zack is finally going to get his moment in the sun when his game, Crisis Core, is fully remastered and released across every current console, all thanks to the breakout success of the Final Fantasy VII remake and Cloud Strife's triumphant return. These characters are not just intertwined in their story, but in their success. The accomplishment of their dreams was only possible because each of them served the other to fulfill their joint destinies. If the Final Fantasy VII remake didn't sell any copies, we wouldn't be looking at a second chapter in the series. They don't tend to make sequels to games that don't sell well.
Right.
But because of that, we're going to get to finally see this in full release. And getting back to Naomi, when she chose to set aside her pain and her bitterness to serve Ruth and help her achieve her dreams, Naomi found her own prayers answered as well in the grandchild that she had given up dreaming for, and the perpetuation of the family name that she believed was gone forever.
Setbacks, disappointment, and tragedy are an unfortunate and unavoidable part of our path. Dreams turn to nightmares without warning, even for those who have placed our trust fully in the Lord. And in those moments, it's easy to believe that our Father has turned his back on us.
Like Naomi, in this painfully hopeless place, we may even choose to define ourselves by our losses, embracing the darkness that has now become more familiar than the happiness we once enjoyed. Maybe we don't change our name, but we start thinking of ourselves in those terms. But there is a way out of these nightmares. Both the fictional character Zach, as well as the real-life widow Naomi, showed us the path. By lifting our eyes beyond our own crushing pain and allowing Christ and his love to flow through us as a vessel to show grace to others, we can help others reach their dreams. And it was in the unselfish pursuit of Ruth's happiness that Naomi found her path from bitterness to blessing. Now, let's keep it real. Her pain was very real for her. Her husband and her sons, they were still gone. They did not magically come back here. But the nightmare that she had been living was now filled with new and precious life, a new child that would not only bring joy and fulfillment back into the lives of Ruth and Naomi, but would also lead to the descendants that would bring the salvation of the world through Christ. Now, the triumphant remastering of Crisis Core will finally allow Zach Fair's incredible story to be discovered by an entirely new generation of fans, bigger and better than it ever was before. Now, sure, for a long time, it was a discarded relic from a long-forgotten system that is no longer in production. And in our pain, it can be easy for us to feel forgotten, discarded, and abandoned as well. Crisis Core was an amazing game for its time. It got great reviews. It didn't do anything wrong to deserve its original fate. It just was released on a doomed platform. There was nothing they couldn't have known at the time.
Right.
And similarly, the tragedies that we endure and the nightmares that follow in our lives are not necessarily our fault. This earthly platform that we're currently running on is simply a flawed operating system that has been corrupted by the effect of the sinful choices of generation after generation of selfish beings. Our once pleasant dreams may have been replaced with nightmares beyond our ability to escape, making our waking hours more painful than we believe we can bear. And the way out of this prison may not be in seeking a way back to our dreams, but allowing the Lord to use us to fulfill the dreams of others. Just as Joseph's unselfish interpretation of others' dreams when he was in prison eventually led to his escape from that and fulfillment of his long gestating dreams, eventually leading to him being second in command of the kingdom of Egypt, Naomi found her fulfillment in life once she assisted Ruth with achieving her happy ending.
It can be hard to wipe the tears from someone else's eyes when we can't see past our own. But as we saw with Naomi and Ruth, it is through our unselfish pursuit of using the gifts the Lord has given us to help others fulfill their God-given dreams that many times the answers to our prayers and the fulfillment of our dreams can be found.
Our tragedies don't magically become pleasant simply through our service and devotion to Christ. And some of the things we've lost don't find their way back to us, at least not on this side of eternity. But there is an escape to the nightmare we are currently walking through. And we don't have to allow this darkness to rename us or define us. If we will raise our heads and look past our own sorrow, we will often find another soul who is enduring the same dream-shattering nightmare we are. And if we are willing to act as a conduit for the love of Christ to heal their pain, we will find that His grace will be sufficient for their needs as well as ours. The pain we are enduring is real, and the nightmare often seems more real than the dreams we once believed in. but the light that will illuminate our darkness may come from giving the little remaining light we have left to another who is in need. Just as the widow who fed Elijah, she had to be willing to give her last remaining meal to receive the provision that would save her and her starving son. And as we're seeing with the Crisis Core remaster, which has been thoughtfully named Reunion by the game developers, we can also experience a beautiful reuniting of our hopes and dreams on the other side of our nightmares, by helping to carry a fellow soul out of their darkness and into the Lord's healing light. We may find that this current painful epilogue that we're playing through is actually just the prologue to a whole new story far beyond our wildest dreams. We'll finish with a reading from Isaiah chapter 58, verses 10 and 11. If you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail.
We truly hope this has encouraged you today, and if you'd like to connect with us or check out some of our other content, such as our articles, videos, daily devotions, and gaming streams, we can be found on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.